Boy howdy, there sure are a lot of fantasy tabletop RPGs coming out lately. I mean, just look at all these PDFs I'm struggling to hold. That's a lot of pages. But I've already read hundreds of pages to play D&D. Why would I want to leave my heroic fantasy RPG for another heroic fantasy RPG? Well, in this video, we're gonna see how two new games, both Daggerheart and Draw Steel, handles a classic D&D encounter, and compare and contrast their core game mechanics to determine which of these games is the next D&D killer. Let's set up the encounter we'll use for both games. We're gonna do a classic, basic, Lost Mines of Phandelver, Instagram white girl goblin ambush. We'll have 4 player characters, each representing the fighter, wizard, rogue, and cleric styles of class for each game. Now I wanna say, it took me way too long to decide which of Chepeku's thousands of battle maps to choose from for our encounter example. And even after picking this one, we'll get to cycle through several of the dozen different variations every one of their battle maps offers. Chepeku also offers hundreds of first-person fantastical scenes and currently over 400 highly customizable tokens, all with new content added every week by subscribing to their complete fantasy bundle in the description below. Chepeku also offers a growing sci-fi bundle for you Starfinder and Cyberpunk fans out there. But you can get all 3 battle maps, scenes, and token subscriptions for the price of 2 at go.chepeku.com/deficientmastermaps. Subscribe to the complete fantasy bundle now at go.chepeku.com/deficientmastermaps. Now, I'm gonna assume you know the basic Dungeons & Dragons core D20 mechanics that would determine how this encounter would play out. But let's take a look at how our first game would differ from D&D, starting with Daggerheart. For the player characters, Daggerheart uses 2 12-sided die for most rolls. Each D12 needs to be a different color. One signifies hope, the other fear, which acts as meta currencies for both the players and the game master. We'll break down what that looks like when we get to the first die roll of this encounter. Let's take a closer look at one of our character classes. This warrior is level 1. Looking at the 6 core stats of Daggerheart, which they call traits, we see that besides most of the names being a little different, like presence instead of charisma or knowledge instead of intelligence, we've dropped constitution in exchange for dividing the dexterity stat into agility for sprinting and leaping rolls and finesse for those more fine motor skills like hiding or tinkering. You'll also notice that the modifiers of these 6 traits are pretty low numbers. A level 1 character of any class uses a standard array of +2, 2 +1 modifiers, 2 0 modifiers, and 1 -1 modifier for their traits. The warrior player wants to move up to the closest goblin and attack. Now, when it comes to combat, Daggerheart can be played either with or without a grid, but its intended method of measuring distance and movement is through abstract ranges of something being either in melee, very close, close, far, very far, and out of range. On your turn, you may move up to close range and then take an action. But if this warrior wants to move far or very far to be able to be in melee with this goblin, then they'll have to make an agility roll to reach the goblin on the same turn. Let's break down a player-facing die roll in Daggerheart. The warrior charges towards a goblin that is far away, intending to attack. The game master will determine the difficulty of reaching the goblin from far away. Just like in D&D, the Game Master decides what is an appropriate difficulty target number the player has to meet or beat with their dice rolls to succeed. The GM tells the warrior player to make an agility check with a difficulty of 10. The warrior rolls their 2d12 duality die and will add their agility modifier of +2 to the total. An 8 + 6 makes 14, +2 agility is a 16 total. The warrior not only succeeds, but succeeds with hope, because the D12 representing their hope is higher than their D12 that represents fear. The warrior rushes from far to melee range to the goblin and marks 1 hope on their character sheet. Using their action, the warrior will now attack with their primary weapon, a broadsword. Which uses agility to attack, and has a unique feature called Reliable, giving the warrior a +1 to attack rolls with their broadsword.
Fire of Wrath!
To smack this goblin, the warrior needs to meet or beat its difficulty, which the GM states is a 12. The warrior's gonna roll their duality dice, which will be a... Hey, I just Leroy Jenkins this goblin, right? I want to spend this 1 hope die I just got to use my experience reckless for a +2 on this attack. An experience is a word or phrase relating to a character's background, characteristic, or even a catchphrase that the player can spend hope to gain a bonus if appropriate. There is no set list of pre-written experiences, so the players and the game master determine what those can be at character creation. Each player starts with 2 experiences, and you get more, and the ones you have get better as you level up. The warrior's gonna roll with a huge bonus then. 2 for agility, 2 for reckless experience, and 1 for the broadsodes feature, for a total of 11 plus 5, 16 to hit. But this time, the warrior succeeded with fear, because their D12 representing fear is higher than their hope die. Fear is the Game Master's meta currency to access special abilities from either the player's adversaries or the fictional environment. The warrior will roll a number of d8s of damage with the broadsword equal with their proficiency, which is similar to the proficiency bonus in D&D. It starts at 1 at level 1, goes from 2 from levels 2 to 4, and will rise all the way to 4 by level 8. Our level 1 warrior rolls 1d8 plus 1 because of a warrior specific class feature and gets a 7. So they did 7 damage to the goblin, right? No. They dealt 1 damage to the goblin, obviously. Daggerheart has a mechanic called damage thresholds. Your actual HP in Daggerheart is pretty low. The warrior only starts with 6 HP, for example, but you will only ever take or dish out 1 to 3 points of damage to HP. How much hit point damage a target takes is determined by where the damage rolled sits between the target's damage thresholds. Any successful hit will deal at least 1 hit point of damage, but in this instance, the warrior's damage roll was a 7 versus the goblin's major damage threshold of 8. So the goblin only takes minor damage, and now drops from 5 to 4 HP. Now, because the warrior succeeded, even with fear, the spotlight stays on the players. Daggerheart has no strict initiative system, but rather players' success and failure determines where the spotlight shifts, either between the players or the Game Master. But the GM can also blow a fear point to claim the spotlight. In fact, let's do that now. Our GM is going to spend that fear point created by the warrior's attack to take the spotlight early. The goblin attacks, but the Game Master does not roll 2d12. The Game Master primarily uses a d20. It's similar to D&D. If the GM ever gets advantage or disadvantage, they roll 2d20 and take the higher or lower result, respectively. But when players get advantage or disadvantage, they get a d6 to their roll, and either add it if it's advantage, or subtract it from the total if it's disadvantage, and they cancel out 1 to 1. The goblin attacks, and we get an 18 total, which in order to hit a player character, the GM has to meet or beat the player character's evasion number. We definitely did here, so we know the warrior is going to take at least 1 hit point of damage, but let's see if it's 2 or more. For our damage roll, we get a 9 total. That exceeded the warrior's major damage threshold, but we haven't even talked about armor yet. Armor is a player-facing mechanic. The type of armor a character wears determines a player character's damage thresholds, but it also offers armor slots. You can never have more than 12 armor slots at a time, but if a player character takes damage, they can spend armor slots to reduce the HP damage 1 to 1. Our warrior currently has 5 base armor, so they can spend 2 armor slots to avoid damage entirely, and they can replenish those armor slots when they rest. It's like a Halo overshield. You gotta crouch to get your armor back. The spotlight goes back to the players, since the GM has no fear points to spend. Let's take a look at the wizard player. They want to move within close range and cast a spell. There are no spell slots in Daggerheart. Rather, spells and other customizable abilities are accessed through domains. These domains can either be singular spells, grimoires, which contain multiple spells, and abilities that are often for non-magical classes. Every class in Daggerheart has access to 2 specific domains. The wizard, for example, has access to the Codex domain and the Splendor domain, while our warrior has access to the Blade and Bone domain. While you can write these down in your character sheet, Daggerheart offers domain cards to be used as a reference in play. A level 1 character starts off with 2 level 1 domain cards and will acquire more as they level up. When you earn more, you can take any cards from your 2 domains that are equal to your level or lower, but you can never have more than 5 domain abilities active at a time. Right now, that's not an issue. So our wizard casts Ice Spike from their domain grimoire, the Book of Ava. They roll their duality dice, adding their spellcasting trait of knowledge, and get a critical roll!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
For players, a critical hit happens whenever the duality dice have matching numbers. You gain a hope, you clear a stress if you have one, we'll get to that in a second, and if you're dealing damage to a target, you add the maximum amount of damage on top of your damage roll. So in Ice Spike's case, the wizard would deal a d6 plus 6 points of damage and compare that total to the goblin's damage thresholds to determine if they did either 1, 2, or 3 points of damage. There There is no running out of spell slots, though some may require you to spend hope or even stress. Stress is another resource that represents all the other types of physical or mental strain a character can take. Some class features may require you to spend stress, some monster abilities attack stress, and if you ever have to spend stress and you can't, you lose 1 hit point instead. If you ever have 0 stress, you're considered vulnerable, which means all dice rolls targeting you have advantage. That's the basics that define Daggerheart compared to Dungeons & Dragons. After reading through the rules and running this scenario myself, here is my deficient opinion. It's a deficient opinion! I like the domain cards. I think if you're gonna play a game that's a bit more crunchy, where players have a list of paper buttons to look through and push, having them in card format is way more manageable than listing all their abilities on a second sheet. I like the concept of experiences. When you have loose keyword type mechanics like this, players often can make up a phrase that can apply to almost anything. Having to at least spend a hope to access them at least allows a sense of balance. Now, contrary to popular belief based on my preferred gaming style, I don't mind metacurrencies. I like how they're generated here and how the game encourages both sides to be spending them almost as soon as you get them. GM-facing metacurrencies is not something I'm used to playing with, but I do like how fear can be used as an excuse as to why certain things happen in the narrative. Like, if I told my players, as the King's Guard surrounds you, I'm gonna now spend 10 fear points I've hoarded up to jump cut you all to getting thrown in the dungeon. That to me feels way less cheap than if I just DM fiated that. You saw all that fear sitting here, you knew something bad was coming, and now I've cashed in my chips and I can't pull off something like that again until I've accumulated more. I don't know if I would love to run an entire campaign where every action I want to take for the world costs me a metacurrency in some way, but I do like how it gives me and the players a permission to be a bit more meaner than usual. What I'm not a fan of is the damage threshold situation. This encounter took just as long as a 5th edition fight, which for me at my table is way too long. Because now there's more steps you gotta do to determine, did you kill the thing? Roll. Compare the monster's difficulty or the player's evasion to see if we get hit. Great. Roll damage dice. Every other d20 system I've played ends there. Subtract it from the HP. Is it 0 yet? They're still alive. Next player. But now we compare that damage number to 2 threshold numbers to determine if we did 1, 2, or 3 damage. And oh yeah, if it's a player, they get to decide if they want to spend armor points to completely negate that 1, 2, or 3 damage. And most tier 1 adversaries are sitting in the 5 to 9 HP range. So it's gonna take you at least 2 to 3 severe damage hits to bring it down, or at least 9 minor damage attacks at most. And you lose that awesome feeling when you get a crit and you're like, I did 40 damage, but you actually dealt 3 hit points of actual HP damage. It feels like we're doing damage rolls with extra steps. Let me end on a positive note though, as I do like how the character sheet presents level ups as these little checkboxes that let you customize what part of your character sheet improves, so no 2 level ups are exactly the same. So yeah, there's a few tools here I could see swiping for my own homebrew rules, and I could see myself running this straight up for like a short 3-session mini campaign. Okay, maybe 5 if you put a gun to my head. Draw Steel is a tactical, heroic, cinematic fantasy TTRPG made by a guy named Matt. So how does Draw Steel compare to Daggerheart, a narrative, heroic fantasy TTRPG also made by a guy named Matt? Let's start this goblin encounter over again. Maybe change the scene a bit, thanks to Chepeku, and let's see how Draw Steel's mechanics influences the gameplay. Draw Steel uses 2 10-sided dice as its primary resolution mechanic for both the players and the Game Master. But rather than the Game Master coming up with a difficulty number like in D&D or Daggerheart, you will always be rolling against a static list of target numbers that determine the tiers of success a roll accomplishes. We'll break down those success tiers in a second. For now, let's look at a player character sheet. This isn't a fighter or a warrior, but a tactician. Here we have the 5 core stats. This time we drop the stat resembling Constitution entirely. The stat modifiers are similar in size to Daggerheart, offering only a +2 at most for a level 1 player character. We also see beneath the stats a speed of 6, which is the number of squares this character can move per turn. Draw Steel requires encounters to use a grid, as most abilities and features in Draw Steel rely on specific positioning. Our tactician wants to move towards the closest goblin and attempt an attack. On a combat turn in Draw Steel, you can make a main action, a move action, and a maneuver action. These types of actions are referenced within the list of moves on your character sheet on the top right. In fact, everything your character can do in combat is on an ability card like this one, and they're pretty self-explanatory. We see the name of the ability, what type of move it is, its range, its targets, and then the 3 tiers of results when you make that 2d10 power roll, followed by the effect, which may have additional information. The majority of abilities in Draw Steel will give you some level of success or success at a cost if you roll a tier 1 outcome, which happens on a roll of 11 or less. That is an 11 on a 2d10, not an 01. In addition to adding the appropriate stat bonuses, you may also have an edge or a bane to apply to your roll. Similar to advantage and disadvantage, but in Draw Steel, one edge gives you a flat +2 to your power roll, and a bane gives you a -2. They cancel each other out 1 for 1, but you can acquire and stack up to 2 edges or 2 banes from different sources for a double edge or a double bane, which will automatically bump your tier by 1 for a double edge or drop your tier result by 1 with a double bane. For simplicity's sake, let's have the Tactician use their signature ability, Protective Attack. On their sheet, we can see exactly what the results could be. They roll their 2d10 and add their might of +2 and get a 13, a tier 2 result, dealing a flat 10 damage to the goblin and giving the goblin the taunting condition, which is one of the unique conditions in Draw Steel where the affected creature will get a double bane to all rolls unless they're targeting the creature who taunted them. Draw Steel also has a list of movement keywords like shift, slide, push, pull, followed by a number that indicates how many squares you can manipulate a target. The Tactician still has the maneuver action, so they'll use their general knockback maneuver that any character can attempt to push. They'll roll again a 19 on the total, which for Draw Steel is considered a critical hit. When you roll a natural 19 or 20 before adding modifiers. This means the ability is an automatic tier 3 success. The goblin will be pushed 3 squares behind them, but there's a tree blocking the push. If a forced movement meets an otherwise immovable object or another creature, the creature being moved will take a flat 2 damage +1 for each remaining square of movement they couldn't take. So this goblin is pushed back only 1 square, but will take a total of 4 damage for the 2 squares of additional forced movement they could not take. The initiative moves to the goblins, where the GM will move and attack with 1 goblin before the turn goes back to the player's side. A GM facing stat block looks something like this. This goblin warrior has 1 signature ability, but can of course access all the basic abilities like grab, knockback, and free attack. However, the Game Master has a meta currency known in Draw Steel as Malice. But unlike Daggerheart's Fear, Malice is gained every turn in combat and only lasts for the duration of the encounter. Malice can be spent on additional abilities within the creature's stat block or by a list of Malice features that the GM creates for this specific encounter beforehand. For example, we could make a Malice feature in this encounter called The Trees Are Speaking Goblinese, where for the cost of 5 Malice, rocks and arrows fly from the trees and any hero within 6 squares of a tree will take 1 bane to their next power roll. This goblin will move 1 square, use their signature ability as their main action, which is a tier 1 result of 3 damage, followed by a knockback maneuver of a tier 2 result. But the Tactician has a stability score of 1, which they can use to reduce the amount of forced movement they take by 1. So the Tactician is only pushed back 1 square. Now, our player characters have their own resource as well. So let's move the initiative to our Elementalist. Their spells are treated just like any other player character ability. Some might be main actions, some are maneuvers, but some abilities may require the cost of your heroic resource, which has its own unique name based on your class. For the Elementalist, it's called Essence, but for the Tactician, it's called Focus. At the start of a combat encounter, you gain the amount of heroic resource equal to the amount of victories you've achieved, which is tracked up here. You gain a victory anytime you overcome a challenge, be that a combat or a stressful situation the Game Master considers worthy of earning a victory. So, you actually get more resources the longer you adventure, not less, because victories are turned into experience points when you rest. Back to heroic resources. A player character also gains 2 of their resource at the start of their turn, and an additional 1 resource if a specific thing happens in a combat round that's related to your class. You don't keep these in between fights, just like the DM's Malice, so there's little point in hoarding them. Our Elementalists will use their ability, The Flesh, a Crucible, as their main action, which costs 3 essence. By the way, I can tell this ability was definitely named by Matt Colville himself. The Flesh, a Crucible. The Elementalist adjusts their current essence amount, rolls their power roll, and gets a tier 2 result. There's no such thing as spells per day or spell levels in Draw Steel. In fact, the only resources that the PCs have to keep account of throughout an adventuring day is recoveries, which basically feels like the 5th edition fighter's second wind ability that can be used in and out of combat, but it recovers a flat amount of stamina for each recovery used. And for stamina, I want you to squint your eyes and you'll see it's Draw Steel's funny way of saying hit points. And that is the basics of Draw Steel. Now, on to my deficient opinion. It's a deficient opinion! Many claim that Draw Steel is an evolution of D&D 4th edition, and I agree. I think that comparison alone will immediately make you either for or against bringing Draw Steel to your table. What I do really like is that the MCDM team tells you on the first page of the game what Draw Steel is trying to accomplish, what Draw Steel is not trying to accomplish, and they even provide suggestions of other games that might fit your preferred playstyle, like Shadow Dark or Forbidden Lands, and they even name drop Daggerheart. So I appreciate Matt and his team for not trying to market this game as it being an answer to all things for all people, unlike some tabletop games. That being said, I would summarize my time with Draw Steel as cool, but not for me. Reading through the rulebook and the Dealing Tomb adventure took me back to my Pathfinder 1E days of looking up flanking and square counting and knowing that the rulebook has an answer to practically any question I could have within the game. There's even a whole chapter that's an emotional resource management system for negotiation. The 3-tier success system sounds interesting on paper, but that means you'll be spending a lot of time referencing what specific thing does that specific tier do with that specific ability. So we're going all in on the paper button game design. Again, nothing wrong with that. Your fun is valid, you play however you want. But I feel like this game could basically run itself without any GM input. If you look through the Delian Tomb adventure, which, by the way, compliment sandwich time, the amount of content you get in the $10 Delian Tomb PDF is totally worth it, if you're even remotely interested in this game system. But when I was reading through the Delian Tomb adventure proper, every die roll a player could make throughout the adventure was spelled out with answers for all 3 tiers of success. Which, granted, this is an introductory adventure that teaches both the players and the game master how to play. But if this is gonna be the standard for Draw Steel adventures, in 1d4 years, you're gonna be able to feed this into an AI and the game will run itself. But I believe Draw Steel does exactly what it wants to do. Tactical, heroic, cinematic roleplay. So 4th edition fans are eating good. Crunchier games like Draw Steel are for groups that want to play with a Bible on the table, where you can reference and quote chapters and verses whenever there's a dispute. But the kinds of rules-light games I'm more interested in, those feel more like the 10 Commandments. Short, direct principles that don't spell out every edge case, but give you enough of a framework to improvise and fill in the rest together at the table based on your group needs. Neither are better than the other, and of course, every game system does not strictly sit in one camp or the other. They all sit on a spectrum, like autism. So, which of these games is the next D&D killer? Well, it's whichever game calls to you and your tabletop philosophy. So which fantasy TTRPG speaks to you more? Let me know below. And if you like these breakdowns, be sure to leave a like, and maybe, just maybe, I'll do more of these. And then I'll throw in this it's a deficient opinion!